Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition here of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in to today's show. And for our midweek show, it should be a good one. As always, we preview tomorrow night's big game in the NFC North. It's Thursday Night Football, Packers and Lions. Really important one in that division. So I'm going to have you all things covered from money lines to spreads to over-unders to even player props as well. We'll be concluding our positional rankings today as well with our defense and special teams units you have to look out for this weekend. Going to update you on the Heisman odds. I know a lot of people are saying this is a two-man race and it's all but over, but I still want to update you before we get into conference championship week because one of these guys still has a chance to show out on that stage. And then, as always, we conclude today's show with our weekly Shadow Report, the key wide receiver cornerback matchups that will define the weekend in fantasy football. But as always, before we get into any of that good stuff, I do want to remind you that if you want to view more content such as this, consider liking, following, and subscribing to the show on the network. We also have a website. You can keep up to date with different segments we do for all of our shows, and some interesting sports articles are there as well. Great people doing great things as always. But if you want to interact with our shows a little bit more directly while we're live streaming, consider making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. They're a great way to contribute and interact. The show just makes it that much better. You can go to our website, gsmcpodcast.net, as well to do the same thing. Either leave a tip or donation or a comment, or you can do it right here on YouTube. It's easy, it's accessible, and most importantly, it gets your voice on air as well. But without further ado, let us jump right into today's show, starting off with tomorrow night's big game in perhaps the best division in the NFL right now. Packers taking on the Lions, and this game certainly feels like it's going to be a lot closer than people think. Obviously, everyone believes that the Lions are the team to beat in that division, sitting there at 11-1, the number one overall seed, in fact, in the NFC. A lot of people's number one team in a lot of their power rankings as well. But the Packers right now seem to have a certain advantage in terms of identity. And what I mean by that is, the Packers are a very versatile team. Yes, they haven't necessarily played anyone to the magnitude of Detroit just yet, and they're going to have a lot of divisional games down the stretch as well to determine whether or not I believe they're for real. But when we look at both of these teams and where they're at right now, they certainly seem to have an advantage in the run game, which seems a little bit weird, but let me explain why. When I compare both of these run games, obviously Detroit stands out just because of that two-headed monster in the backfield in Montgomery and Gibbs and what they can do. But we turn it on its head and look at the Packers offense going up against this Lions defense. This Lions defense is decimated at key positions. The Packers are well equipped to attack. Looking at that linebacker core, you're down Alex Anzalone, you're down Malcolm Rodriguez now, and I'm not even sure who your third string guys are. Your secondary, yes, has been one of the better aspects of this team. It might be stressed out by this very versatile, volatile Packers receiving core. A lot of physical players, a lot of intriguing players out there as well. No true wide receiver ones to necessarily worry about, which could be a good or bad thing for them. But the most important factor in this entire offense is Josh Jacobs, in my opinion. This is a guy who can wear a defense out, especially a defense that has been decimated by injuries and doesn't necessarily have enough players to truly step up. And so that's why I'm a little bit worried and apprehensive to say this will be a complete and utter domination by the Detroit Lions, because of the fact that when I look at that defense and I look at the Packers' strengths and the ways they can utilize them in this game to sustain drives, most importantly, keep the ball away from that versatile Lions offense on the other side, is by running the football, by playing smash mouth football, trying to put as many points on the board as possible, and most importantly, make sure you win the time of possession battle. That's where this battle is going to be won. This is a classic battle of the trenches, and I think the Packers have the overwhelming advantage in terms of what they can do in the run game against this decimated Lions front. But on the Lions side of things, this offense is still going to be very prolific once they get the football. Yes, when we look at this Lions offense matching up with the Packers defense, Jared Goff seemingly needs to be more efficient than he's ever been this season because of the fact the Packers are the kings of the takeaways on the defensive side of the football. It's what they do in order to generate more possessions for their team, in order to flip the field position battle, and they know that their secondary can be super aggressive. But then again, when I look at the matchups here, when I look at how the Lions utilize different people outside of their running backs, we're going to have a big say in this game as well. Guys like Amon-Ra, guys like Jameson Williams have been coming on these past couple of weeks. A guy like Sam Laporta, who's a very physical presence, but can also be a great inline route runner, a great seam stretcher for you as well. I think that the Lions would feel like they can stretch this defense, whether vertically or horizontally, because of the weapons they have. For example, in third and short situations, Jared Goff's most likely going to be looking for Amon-Ra. Amon-Ra is a very precise route runner in short yardage situations. If you want to take the deep shot, I think Jameson Williams is going to have the top end speed to technically try and go out there and try and make something happen down the field. In the middle of the field, Sam Laporta can feast as well. He's going to really be aggressive with these Packers linebackers who, in my opinion, are not necessarily the strongest unit for the Packers, but certainly do have depth pieces that I really like, but not against this guy in Sam Laporta, who's going to be really physical with you, is very exploitative in certain coverage situations, and thus can have a big impact in this one. And of course, you also have to worry about the run game as well. And you also have to worry about blocking and potentially penetrating that offensive line. You're going to have to worry about a lot of matchups on that front. And I feel like, if the Packers front really steps up, there are chances to be had in terms of sacking Jared Goff, generating pressure on him, forcing him out of structure. And that's also going to be key because when Jared Goff is given time in the backfield, chances are he can pick you apart because he's that kind of guy now. He's not someone who is going to scramble for the first down. Not someone who's looking to do that either. He's someone who seemingly fits so well in this offensive scheme that any of his deficiencies are masked. So that's why he's so difficult to truly interpret in terms of how you have to defend him. And when I think about the Packers, I think more about their takeaways stemming from covering on the back end. Guys like Jair Alexander and Xavier McKinney. Not necessarily from forcing quarterbacks into bad decisions from your front. Not to say that this Packers front isn't necessarily deep. I like some of their players up front, like Devontae Campbell. I actually don't necessarily know if they still have guys like Devontae Campbell there, but they have pieces up front who I really think could be able to generate enough pressure against this very tough, physical Detroit line. But it's going to come down to these corners on the back end going up against these very versatile receivers, trying to generate takeaways as they always do. Because Jared Goff is too smart of a quarterback to fall into the trap of trying to perform out of structure. Their only way to generate takeaways or win the field position battle is by generating sacks. Not to say that interceptions and long returns aren't necessarily a good thing. I do feel like you have to find more ways to win the field position battle. You can't just rely on Jair Alexander and Xavier McKinney in this one because you know how deep this Lions skill position group is. So you're going to have to find different ways to win the field position battle outside of just Alexander and McKinney. But then let's get into the betting because this game feels like it could have gone one way. It feels like all the momentum could have been on Detroit's side. But Vegas is now respecting the Packers and respecting their situation, understanding this is going to be a tight one. Detroit is only favored by 3.5 at home. The over-under is 51.5. Detroit minus 185 in terms of money lines. Green Bay plus 155. So as you can see, it's not just because it's a divisional matchup. It's because it's going to be a physical one that I really don't know if the Lions will pull away in. Because of the fact, like I said, this defensive front now worries me more than bolsters my case to pick the Lions outright. Because when I think about it, I think about the Packers as a team that can also attack you in so many ways in this division. You don't necessarily know if they're going to want to control this one with Josh Jacobs or utilize their weapons to the best of their abilities. Because they're that deep at the wide receiver position, you can throw the football and have success there. Yes, Jordan Love has been inconsistent in terms of throwing the football this season, but you know that his weapons are versatile enough that when they get the ball in their hands, they can produce for him, and thus kind of reduce and account for and compensate for the mistakes Love makes. So that's why I feel like, in terms of picking this game and trying to predict it, I feel like I have to give respect to what the Packers can bring. So I'm going to say, kind of reluctantly, that Detroit is going to win this one, but not necessarily handily. I think this is also going to be more of a defensive-minded game in terms of how they're going to game plan for each other, just because I feel like Detroit's going to want to cover up the mess that is their defense right now, whereas the Packers are also going to want to be aggressive on the defensive side of the football and try and find some way to slow down Goff's rhythm. So that's why I feel like this game is going to be a little bit more tight. That being said, I'm going to say Detroit wins this one 28-26. I feel like there are going to be a couple big defensive plays that are going to swing this one, especially with the cornerback talent that we have in this one, the secondary talent that we have in this one. So expect a lot of nice long interception returns potentially, but I'm going to take Detroit 28-26, but the Packers will cover in this one because they have a slight advantage in terms of being able to pressure this Lions defense. It's just a matter of keeping up with what the Lions offense is going to be able to produce. Let me know what you think about this game as well, because we're going to be continuing to talk about it when we come back after this short break, talking about some player props and who could be big impacts in this one as well. So we're going to continue this after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world?
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our second segment of today's show, I do want to remind you that if you do wish to contribute and interact with the show a little bit more directly while we are live streaming, consider making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. Great way to get your opinions heard here on the show. I love getting your comments. You can do it in one of two ways, here on YouTube or going to our website, gsmcpodcast.net. Great way to really contribute to this show if you feel so inclined, but also just makes it that much better. Without further ado, let us jump into our second segment of the day here on today's show. Kind of sticking in the world of Thursday Night Football, talking about some player props, because we have a lot of interesting players to talk about in that regard, because of the fact we have so much multifaceted talents here, in terms of running backs, in terms of skill positions, in terms of quarterbacks even. Because of the fact that it's also a divisional game, we're going to have to respect a lot more players, much more than we would for, say, a meaningless intra-conference game at the start of the season, because this is a highly important game for both of these teams. For the Lions, they want to prove their mettle in this division, prove they truly are the best, not just in the division, but in the entire NFC. And for the Packers, this one could keep them in the NFC North race and that race for the number 1 seed, for that matter as well. Without further ado, let's jump right into who are going to decide this game. Starting off with the running backs here. Let's start off with Dave Montgomery, because I think now is his time to prove why he is still, quote-unquote, the lead back there in Detroit, even though it is kind of even in terms of touches and target share between him and Gibbs. I do think he's going to be an anytime touchdown score at -170, just because of the fact that Detroit's sustained drives always seem to end up in Dave Montgomery range. And what I mean by that is, when Detroit sustains drives, they're always physical and they always kind of stop at around the 5 to 1 yard line, and thus a guy like Dave Montgomery, who can be used a lot in goal-to-go situations, is going to have a lot of touches near the red zone in this one. And so that's why I feel like, even though Jahmyr Gibbs is responsible for a lot of what they do in the open field, David Montgomery is their finisher. He's their closer in those moments when they're there in short yardage situations in the red zone. And that's why I think that if the Lions start to control the time possession battle, especially later in the game, David Montgomery is going to have a bigger say in how many points they put up, because of the fact he is the guy that can really, really grind you out. And so that's why David Montgomery is someone who, even though not a lot of people might want to bet on this specific one, is a very interesting asset in terms of the betting market, because he's such a interesting player to analyze from that perspective. Let's talk about Josh Jacobs. Whereas I think David Montgomery is going to be the anytime touchdown scorer for the Lions, I think Josh Jacobs will score the first touchdown of this football game. It's a lofty kind of number here at +600, but I do think that if the Packers get the ball first, look for them to really give a lot of touches to Josh Jacobs in the first drive to really set the tone for what they want to do offensively in this one. And I know it's a pretty lofty number, it's a long shot bet, but I do think that if that's what happens and the Packers do receive the ball first, they're going to want to state their intent. They're not just going to be a little bit tentative and sit back and see what the Lions are giving them. No, they're going to say, we're going to try to grind you out, we're going to exploit your weaknesses, prove you're too thin at the linebacker and defensive line levels, and thus just run it down your throats. Josh Jacobs is perfectly capable of doing that, especially early in games, because I feel like as this game's going to go on, this Lions secondary is going to prove to be a little bit more aggressive, and you don't necessarily want that later in the game if you might have to play catch-up. So look for them to instate their intents with Josh Jacobs, and I think that he very well could be finding the end zone on that first drive for the Packers. But that's the running backs for you. Let's go to the quarterbacks, because this is a very intriguing quarterback matchup, right? You have a guy in Jordan Love who seemingly is a little bit more diverse in nature than Goff, but we don't necessarily have a real grasp of what he can be in the NFL, right? He had that one good season where he was second in the league in touchdown passes last year, upset the Cowboys there, but this season had an injury early on in that game in Brazil. Hasn't necessarily looked similar to what we saw of him last year in his first year as a starter. So I don't necessarily know how to view him from a betting perspective, but I think the safe thing would be to bet the under here in terms of passing yards. A, because I feel like this has become a more run-oriented attack, and B, I don't necessarily think you're going to have to pass to win this football game, even though you have all these weapons at your disposal at the wide receiver position. This feels like a game where you can ground them out. He's not going to have any pass attempts, I don't think, and I think he's going to be willing to allow Josh Jacobs to take over this game if he can. That's why I don't necessarily think Jordan Love will going to put up gaudy numbers tomorrow night. At -114, I think that's the safest bet for the quarterback position tomorrow night, just because that's going to be the Packers' MO tomorrow night. Run, run, run. There are going to be some opportunities potentially for Jordan Love in this game to prove that he can quarterback in certain situations. improve that his decision making maybe has improved in some regards. But overall, this feels like a Josh Jacobs game rather than a Jordan Love game. Even though I would love to see him try have a go at this in terms of really proving his stuff as one of the top quarterbacks in the league that could be able to take down Detroit come the postseason. So that's why I'm looking at Jordan Love to kind of be a little bit more serviceable and opportunistic in this one rather than trying to play hero ball. It's going to be an important thing to look at in that one as well. Then going over to Jared Goff, this guy has just been consistent, whether or not he's putting up gaudy numbers, or whether or not he's just completing passes at a high rate and a high level. He's a very sneaky MVP candidate right now, probably not going to win it because he did have that 5-interception game against Houston, and he's not necessarily the sexiest option. He's not necessarily the Lamborghini. He's more so like a Lexus or something like that. He's not a shiny new object. But in this matchup against a divisional opponent, this is where I feel like Jared Goff can be in his element, you know? He's going to want to take the Packers down a peg, say, hey, we're the top dogs, and I think he's going to go over in terms of passing touchdowns, 1.5 at -120 here, just because, you know, even though Jared Goff is not necessarily the main reason why this offense is putting up points, he is kind of the driving force of what a game manager type quarterback can be at an elite level. When you know he has all these offensive minds surrounding him who can trust him to do certain things this offense. And even though, right, he's not the dual threat guy, he's not a Josh Allen, he's not a Swiss Army knife like Lamar Jackson, he is still a solid quarterback at the end of the day. So that's why I think that in this matchup, he's going to prove that even against these tough physical opponents, he can still grind out results for you as well. And then, in terms of receiving threats in this one, I do believe that there are going to be a lot of opportunities for different receivers to really sink their teeth into this game, but it's not necessarily going to come right away. I think that these two teams, like I said, are going to try to grind the other out and go from there, right? Because both of these guys at the quarterback position, Jordan Love and Jared Goff, we know they can spin it, but they don't necessarily want to risk it in terms of trying to test these two stellar secondaries. So look for them in terms of receivers to really be more effective as the game goes on rather than really early. But that being said, I do think Jameson Williams could be a huge X factor because he is the deep threat here for the Lions. And I think that, you know, testing a guy like Jair Alexander is tough because he's going to want you to keep you in front of him. But I feel like Jameson Williams is one of those talents where his top-end speed and pace provide enough electricity where the Lions could be confident in getting him in a one-on-one situation isolated with Jair Alexander. So that's why I think he could potentially hit the over in terms of yardage. 48.5 receiving yards, -115. It could take surprisingly long because, like I said, this is a very physical divisional rivalry. But I do think he could be a big aspect as to why Detroit could pull out this one late. Just because of the fact that having a guy, a game changer at the position in terms of speed, really makes a difference for the Lions because Jared Goff knows he has that in his back pocket if, you know, the ground game isn't necessarily going as expected. So that's why, you know, I'm more confident in a high-end receiver from Detroit really having a say and impact in this one than one from Green Bay. And that's why when I was looking at Green Bay's receivers, no one really tempted me in terms of really standing out in this game, potentially as a nice little bet to bet on. That's why I went to Tucker Kraft here, because like I said, Tucker Kraft yesterday when I was ranking tight ends is someone who is not necessarily revolutionary, but he can do everything well. He's a toolsy tight end. He can block for you. He can run up the seam for you, run nice routes, be physical in the red zone especially. And against this decimated linebacker core, look for him to sit in coverage and really try and exploit them as well. And I think that the main threat of Tucker Kraft is that most of his production can come in the red zone, but he is a very underrated open field tight end. he is very underrated in terms of yards after catch abilities. And I think that's where, if the Packers see mismatches they like, that's where Jordan Love is going to be looking to a lot. So look for Tucker Kraft to be an anytime touchdown scorer at plus 175 in this one, just because you're going to have to find certain matchups in the pass game you like to try and play catch up with this Detroit team. And Tucker Kraft is going to be a very reliable target. He's going to be a lot more physical than these third-string linebackers Detroit has, so look for him to have a huge advantage in this. But overall, going to be a very fun matchup. Like I said, it's going to come down to a lot of these running back guys when we're talking about Josh Jacobs, Tucker Kraft, David Montgomery, Laporta maybe, Goff, and his ability to stay in structure, and Jordan Love for his ability to just manage the game as needed. So I think this is going to be interesting. Let me know what you think in the comments, because coming up next, we transition to our final positional rankings for the week here with a defense and special teams units as you need to look out for this weekend in fantasy, because you definitely don't want to miss it right after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search.
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. And for our third segment of the day, we're going to be doing our final positional rankings for Week 14 of the NFL season for the defense and special teams units you have to look out for. Now, as always, I'm going to try and have the benefit of the doubt here with these defenses, because defenses are, in my opinion, a position that are going to be highly revered in the very near future, because it's becoming more of a defensive league right now, and as we've seen, these defenses can score more touchdowns than certain offenses. And I feel like they're going to be the difference makers in terms of how we interpret which top-level defenses might merit consideration over even some really low-end position players. Like I said before this season, more and more fantasy football managers are drafting defenses a little bit earlier than you might expect, not waiting to pounce on a defense that they really like. And that's going to happen. And these four defenses are going to be defenses maybe not necessarily in the future that you're going to want to look out for, but have been mainly consistent these past 5 or so years in terms of producing for you on a fantasy level. At some point, these four defenses could very well be a top-level defense. For example, some of these defenses have high-end talent that they're going to be able to maintain for quite some time, while certain of them, like one on this list, are going to be up-and-coming ones as well, who are going to be competing in their division for times to come. But overall, it's just a fun position to talk about, just because it's finally getting the respect it deserves. So without further ado, let's jump right into it, starting off with one of the most aggressive defenses in the league, going up against their former QB, really wanting to compound his misery right now. It's the Vikings going up against the Atlanta Falcons. This is the most favorable matchup you could find in this game. The Vikings players are not only coming in as one of the most aggressive defenses in the league under Brian Flores, but they're coming in with a vengeance to really hammer home that they were right in allowing Kirk Cousins to walk to Atlanta for $180 million. I feel like that was a complete waste of money for Atlanta to have a $180 million basically statue playing for you at the QB position, so to speak. Because over these past 4 games, Kirk Cousins has thrown 6 interceptions and no touchdowns for you. And I understand that, Michael Penix is sitting in the wings, but he did get you in first place. So if you're Atlanta, you made this bed for yourself. You can't necessarily get out of this situation by throwing a 25-year-old, 26-year-old rookie out there and expecting him to lead you to the playoffs. So they're going to have to ride with Kirk for as long as they got, but with that comes all the deficiencies that made Viking fans impatient with him in terms of his mobility, in terms of his decision-making at certain times, in terms of his accuracy. And so the Vikings defense are well equipped to prove that. If there's anyone who's familiar with Kirk, it's Kevin O'Connell, and he's going to understand the mobility issues, and he's going to want to attack that. So look for this to be a very, very ugly game for this Falcons offense. I wish I could say that these young studs they have can elevate Kirk Cousins, but Kirk Cousins has to elevate himself, because you have to escape the pocket if things aren't happening for you downfield. You have to create a structure. But the thing with Kirk Cousins is he can't. And that's going to be starkly clear against one of the better defenses this season in the National Football League. So look for this to be my defensive lock of the week, basically, because I feel there's no simpler matchup for any team, plus the added motivation of wanting to really humiliate your former quarterback. Now let's talk about a defense that I feel like has been going under the radar this season just because last year they were much better than where they're at now, but have become a little bit more opportunistic at these past few weeks. Obviously, gave up 41 points to the Broncos. Not all of them was their fault in all reality, but in this matchup, the second matchup with the Steelers in a matter of 3 weeks, look for this Browns defense to be extra motivated yet again. I feel like, a lot of people are saying they can't possibly beat Pittsburgh twice, right? They can't possibly do this. But I really think the Browns can, because for some reason, the Steelers kind of get dragged into this Browns energy, because it feels like the Browns invest a lot into playing spoiler or potentially making some noise in the AFC North. They're never going to really win the division, perhaps. They might make the playoffs some years, but you best believe that when they're playing the divisional rivals, they're going to come correct. They've done it with the Ravens. They've done it with the Steelers over the past couple of years. They've been giving the Bengals tough games. So this defense and this team in particular, even though they're not necessarily looking attractive to win more games, potentially 1 or 2 down the stretch, this defense is going to be motivated for the rest of their divisional rivalries. You don't want to face a motivated, ticked-off Browns team if you play in the AFC North down the stretch. And the Steelers, yes, they're coming off a high. They scored 44 points, and Russell Wilson looked like he was in his rookie year in Seattle. He looked like he was playing freely again. He completely eschewed that early pick six and played his typical Seattle Seahawks era football and really proved that he can still have it in certain moments. But against the Browns, there's just something that brings me back to that performance in the snow in Cleveland 2 weeks ago. And I can't get it out of my head, even though I'm trying to justify saying that a defense that's fallen off a cliff kind of a little bit this season is going to step up and do it again in a matter of 3 weeks. And so this one's going to be a little bit tough to justify fully, but I'm going to stick with them and say that in this matchup, chances are the Steelers are going to find it a little bit more tough yet again to crack this Browns defense. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt, even though they just had one of their worst games of the season. Not entirely their fault, remember, yet again. But still a defense that I believe can come correct in a divisional rivalry week in, week out. So look for that to happen yet again. And let's talk about, two teams that really have been playing underrated defensively but are just too terrible overall to really merit consideration as a top fantasy defense, but that's what one of these defenses have been. So let's talk about the Tennessee Titans defense facing off against the Jaguars, another terrible team. Yes, I understand that they got beaten down by Washington pretty badly, but Washington was ticked off. They had lost a lot of tough games against their divisional rivals as well, and they wanted to beat up on a lowly Titans team. And yes, there are a lot of injuries in that stellar secondary for the Titans this season as well. But against the Jaguars, even though I have high hopes for what potentially could come out of this Mac Jones, Parker Washington thing, it could be a little bit nice to watch down the stretch of the season and a fun development there. But I just think this Titans defense needs to gain its flowers. And so in this matchup, I feel like I would get less bashed, by saying that, yeah, this Titans defense can beat up on the Jaguars than if, say, they could beat up on a top 10 team in the Bills or Chiefs or even Chargers and Ravens in the AFC. So that's why I decided to pick them for this week. Even though, they're not necessarily going to be highly coveted down the stretch as they play out this season, I just have to respect a unit that really has been stellar. A top 10 unit through and through this season as well. One of the top pass defenses in the league, one of the most physical run defenses in the league. And thus, when you get matchups like these where you can justify sticking to your guns and saying this underrated defense needs to be looked at a lot more, then obviously I'm going to shed the light on them because I have to. It's kind of my job here because I can just sit here and say, pick these top 10 defenses. They're always nice plays. But the Titans truly are someone that deserves respect. Maybe down the line, to become a more well-rounded team and potentially more people tune into this defense in order to understand how good it really is. But as of right now, they're a pretty bad team and their defense is an aberration. Maybe that's why a lot of people don't like them. But in certain matchups, right, where you think to yourself, well, this Titans team is so bad, but they're playing the Jaguars, just pick them. Because I guarantee you're not going to regret it. And maybe against teams like the Bills and the Chiefs in the future, they might actually perform pretty well if they have a solid foundation overall. So that's why you have to look at the Titans now and relate it to the future. Because they truly are a stellar unit right now. And last but not least, this one can go either way. Because I really want this defense to at least have some modicum of success. I'm shocking myself by saying that because I'm a Seattle Seahawks fan, but the 49ers defense, I really hope that they have at least one solid defensive performance before the season is all said and done. Because this defense seems to be reeling right now. They have no direction. They don't have all of their weapons healthy and ready to go for the stretch ahead for them, if they want to even compete in the NFC West for that matter. So this one could go pretty badly against the Bears, who seem to have found new life under former OC, now interim head coach Thomas Brown, potential new head coach if he does well. And it could go pretty badly for the 49ers if Caleb Williams is on yet again. But I do think that when I look at this 49ers defense, there is still pride there. There's still players who are performing, whether it be for short-term contracts, whether it be to stay in that divisional race. I feel like there's still going to be moments where we see this 49ers defense look like the 49ers defenses of old. This is not a unit that's going to give up that easily. It's not a unit that I think will pack it in just because you have Nick Bosa, Dre Greenlow. You are a unit that has been respected and revered for many years, and you have a chance to prove it, even with all your weapons absent. So, why not make a go of it down the stretch? Why not say, we're at this point right now and it's not looking good, but we really are a unit that can really still attack you in so many ways. And against a Bears team that's still trying to find its footing on the other side of the football, maybe looking better in this one, look for the 49ers to say, not so fast. We're going to bring you back to earth, Bears, and prove that we're still a unit that needs respect. And who knows, maybe in 1 to 2 years, this unit will be completely broken up. Their players will be scattered all over the NFL because they're going to have to focus on trying to retain some of these stars. They're in a very weird place, the 49ers. But for now, just play with the pride and the freedom you know you can, because you are the San Francisco 49ers and you earn the right to be respected as one of the top defensive units in the league. And I know some of these defenses on this list sound cliche, but overall, all 4 of these defenses could be in very interesting, different, diverse situations down the years. So, kind of look at them now, and later in the future, maybe 3 to 5 years, determine whether or not these are truly defenses that can stand the test of time. Because what we're seeing potentially be a new revolution where as teams, bottom feeders start to get better, their defenses will continue to perform at their levels as well. So maybe a defense like the Titans will usurp defenses like the Vikings and 49ers down the stretch. So look out for that as well. But that will just about do it for our positional rankings for this week. I hope you enjoyed them. But coming up next, we take a little bit of a transition into the world of college football, not previewing anything just yet, but looking at some Heisman odds. I know a lot of people are saying this is a two-man race right now, but I say otherwise, and a lot could happen over the Conference Championship weekend to prove that. We'll be right back after this short break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. For our fourth segment of the day, it's going to be our college football segment, a little bit more looking ahead to award season here as we're wrapping up the college football regular season heading into conference championship weekend. We're going to be taking a little look at the updated Heisman odds. Now I know a lot of people are saying this thing is done and dusted. Ashton Jeanty and Travis Hunter are your top two candidates, and that's what I'm going to say. But there are still cases to be made for certain players. Ashton Jeanty could move ahead and usurp Travis Hunter as the favorite if he absolutely goes crazy in his conference championship game against UNLV. A lot of these guys still have opportunities to prove themselves. It might be a little bit too late, and Travis Hunter at the end of the day will be holding that trophy in New York. But I still want to give these players a benefit of the doubt that each and every single one of them on this list has had an incredible season, maybe some over others as well. But I do feel like I just want to look at this list and appreciate all five of these top candidates here, potentially headed to New York. So without further ado, let's do just that. Starting off at the number 5 position, this guy unfortunately did not acquit himself very well in a big rivalry game. Perhaps the game that could have, vaulted him into the top 4, at the very least top 5 potentially. But unfortunately, Will Howard saw his chances of going to New York drop drastically with that loss to Michigan. A plus 40,000 still was the 5th odds favorite. Mind you, this came out about a week ago, so potentially a lot more updated odds by now. But Will Howard at the tie of the 5th position, and he could have been justified, right? Because he's had a pretty good season playing on one of the better teams in college football. But ultimately, what's been hindering him throughout his entire career, not just the season, is being prone to mistakes, not understanding certain situations, and most importantly, losing big games. That's why Will Howard finds himself in the 5th spot and potentially outside looking in to players actually going to the Heisman ceremony in New York in a couple months' time. So unfortunately, as much as I appreciate what Will Howard did to this program and the money Ohio State was willing to spend on him and to invest in him, it ultimately came up too short for me to consider him as a true Heisman finalist, even though at that point he was number 5 in the Heisman odds. Then we get into really interesting candidates to debate here as we get into the top 4 here. Even though these guys aren't going to win the award, they are still guys who had incredible seasons for top teams. Coming in at number 4, the top team in the country, the quarterback of it, Dillon Gabriel, really special talent, plus 6,000 here. And Dillon Gabriel very well could have won the Heisman. For a long stretch of time, he was actually Heisman favorite for many weeks because he was leading the number 1 team in the country. And throughout his career, he's proven to be one of the most prolific passers, not just in the country, but in college football history. One of the top passing leaders all time in college football. Truly storied player, whether he was at UCF, whether he's at Oklahoma, now at Oregon trying to win a national championship and ride off into the sunset. Even though he's not going out with a Heisman Trophy as well. This is truly a guy who will stand the test of time in college football and be revered as one of the top college football players ever. Even if he doesn't win a championship, if he doesn't win the Heisman, who cares? this guy holds a lot of weight in college football circles everywhere as a player who truly revolutionized the sport, who truly stands out as a premier player of the past 2 decades in college football. So we thank players like Dillon Gabriel, even though in terms of Heisman, in terms of hype, he's not necessarily the most pretty of options. But I just want to appreciate him for who he was, and he's definitely going to New York, but not walking away with that nice little trophy. Then, kind of a guy in a similar situation, Cam Ward, another guy with a crazy journey, taking him to Miami, having a fun little season down there, but ultimately his defense did not perform to his level. And so he finds himself the third favorite here at plus 1,400. I do feel, that Miami might sneak into the playoffs. They're going to have a lot happen. Potentially Clemson winning the ACC, trying to have the committee talk about that debate. Should Clemson be a bid stealer? But even if they don't, this is an incredible season for Miami. For a program that, people were saying were falling off, a lot of issues there with boosters and what have you, but Cam Ward was a paragon of consistency this season. A magical player, leading them back from the dead in a lot of conference games, and truly someone amazing to watch and truly worthy of going to New York and potentially justifiably winning a Heisman Trophy. He also, as like Dillon Gabriel, is very well respected in college football circles as one of the top premier college football players of this era. But, unfortunately, magic runs out, and 2 units don't complement each other. And so, his defense, and not having signature wins, and just the hype around these other 2 guys truly are what overwhelms him in terms of Heisman odds. So, even though I respect Cam Ward for what he did this season for Miami, I do feel like he is someone who is going to go to New York, but ultimately not win the award. Now, at number 2, this guy is my personal Heisman Trophy winner here. This guy, when it's all said and done, should win the Heisman Trophy. Every single time a defense stacks the box, this guy can crack the code. He stands in the backfield. I don't know what he's doing. He's just standing like a normal person, maybe waiting for a stoplight to change or something. And when he gets the balls in his hands, he really electrifies crowds. Ashton Jeanty. I think, to me, he really is the Heisman, as he's proving in that pose, in that photo on my screen. But at the end of the day, he plays for Boise State. And even though he has a chance, unlike all of these other guys, to prove this point in his conference championship game, prove that they're the best group of 5 team, being the best group of 5 team is different from being, say, the best Big Ten team, or being, the best ACC team. Because of the fact that Ashton Jeanty plays in a worse conference. Even though, Boise State has one of the best losses in the country, by 3 points to now number 1 Oregon, where Ashton Jeanty had his Heisman moment, I feel like that holds him back. And it shouldn't, but I feel like, this other guy has too much hype surrounding him, too much of a more nationalized brand than Ashton Jeanty, even though, in my humble opinion, if you sell out to stop this guy and he just dominates you, that's impressive. Because guys who have done this at running back position in the past simply should not be averaging what Ashton Jeanty does with 8 to 9 men in the box. He's averaging a yard, close to 2 yards with 8 to 9 men in the box. You shouldn't be averaging even 0 yards. So that's why I feel like Ashton Jeanty is a completely anomalous player in college football. But the guy in number 1 is completely anomalous too, because he plays 2 ways, and he plays for a big brand. And that, of course, is Travis Hunter. There's no denying, right, that Travis Hunter is a special player. A 2-way star who has been dominating headlines for every single week of the college football season. He's justifiably going to win the award. But something says to me that when we look at recent history and the momentousness of this decision to award a guy like Travis Hunter, who plays both ways, the Heisman Trophy, it feels a little bit weird right now when you have a guy in Ashton Jeanty who is breaking, or close to breaking, was so close to breaking a historical running backs college football record. I can't deny that, right? As much as I respect Travis Hunter for what he's done this season, as much as I think his winning the award is highly justified, and he's going to have a very successful potential Hall of Fame career, potentially playing as a two-way prospect for a great team down the stretch. Ashton Jeanty is something we might never see again, just because of what he brings to the running back position. And I don't necessarily want to ruin Travis Hunter being here at number 1, because, like I said, Travis Hunter is a special player. We may never see a guy play as many snaps as he's done on both sides of the football ever, even though there are a couple college guys who might. High school guys who are coming in who might. So for now, we have to appreciate Travis Hunter for who he is. We all have to appreciate the fact that Ashton Jeanty is this close to history. And that's my point here. So both of these top 2 candidates, it's clear that either one of them is going to win the Heisman, and it's most likely going to be Travis Hunter. But I just want to give all of these guys their flowers for very prolific college football careers. And so, in this special moment for a special player, I don't want it to get clouded by the fact that, there were other talented players who, even though lost momentum as the season went on, deserve to go to New York and be represented and talked about. Because they're going to be the players who in the future are the faces of the National Football League and revered by many. So that's why I feel like, even though, you can say this race is done, look at the names inside of the list. Look at the names at 3, 4, 5, potentially all the way down. Because these players deserve their flowers as well. But Travis Hunter is truly one of a kind, and truly someone who's going to be dominant for years to come in the National Football League, and he deserves his flowers as well. Let me know what you think about the race in the comments. But coming up next to conclude today's show, as always, going over our weekly Shadow Report. The key wide receiver cornerback matchups will define the weekend in fantasy football. We'll be right back to conclude today's show right after this short break. Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day. As always, to conclude our Wednesday show, it is our weekly Shadow Report. We'll be discussing the key wide receiver cornerback matchups will define the fantasy football weekend. And this week, I wanted to go over some very familiar matchups between guys that we've seen before on this list, but I also wanted to go with a little couple of under the radar matchups as well. Now, all of these are either divisional rivalries or just match between two stellar corners. But the first one I wanted to start out with is a little bit unorthodox because I want to respect certain matchups that you feel the wide receiver has the advantage in, but you also have to monitor this cornerback. And that's the first one that I want to go to because this is a bizarre matchup, a bizarre trap game for the specific team I'm going to be talking about, but also kind of wanted to break up the monotony of this list because the other three matchups are basically star against star. And this one isn't necessarily viewed that way. So without further ado, let's jump right into the first Shadow Report matchup of the week. Starting off with that bizarre one, Mike Evans going up against Jack Jones. It's Bucs Raiders. This is a very weird game in my opinion because this one feels like the trappiest of trap games. You have the Bucs trying to build momentum to get back into the lead in the NFC South, and the Raiders, seemingly, not necessarily out of it, but just kind of playing for pride in certain situations, but not overall a team you would feel confident in upsetting someone down the road. But this match between Mike Evans and Jack Jones could be a very anomalous one in this game. I do expect the Bucs to truly dominate physically this Raiders defense, which seems weird because they have one of the most physical players on their defensive line in Max Crosby, but the Bucs are a very tough offense. Baker Mayfield's a tough guy. Mike Evans is a physical receiver. You have a lot of physical, shifty players in your backfield, so this is going to be a tough matchup for the Raiders. But the reason why I isolated this one matchup because the Raiders aren't necessarily known for their secondary depth. They're more known for their front seven guys. But Jack Jones is someone who has been around the league, very experienced guy, former Patriot, and I think out of all their corners, he's the best one and most likely to really shadow and be able to shadow effectively a guy like Mike Evans. And if you're the Bucs, you're going to have to stay composed in certain situations because the Raiders can force you out of structure if you're Baker in terms of generating pressure from their front. So look for certain situations to be a lot tougher for the Bucs than you might expect, and look for Baker to try and find Mike Evans for most of his first reads early and often. But Jack Jones is someone who I want to be a standout X factor here in this one because he's going to be responsible for trying to keep this Raiders secondary room together because that's the most likely unit to fall apart here in this matchup. I think the Raiders can keep this a lot closer than people think, but I do feel like the Bucs are going to be all about physicality and taking it to them and matching up really well man-to-man on that front. And so if the Raiders can be able to win this cornerback battle here between two solid players here, then chances are they're going to stay in this football game. But if they can't, and Baker Mayfield gets whatever he wants in long situations, then it's going to be trouble a brewing for Oakland in this. Las Vegas in this one. No longer Oakland there. But I just wanted to highlight this matchup as one of the weirder ones of the weekend. Now let's get into more chalk matchups, more superstar versus superstar matchups. Starting off with one that actually kind of feels exactly like this one, but still are two superstar level players, even though the cornerback is in a very bad defense. It's Justin Jefferson going up against A.J. Terrell. I believe we've seen this match before in the past, and I do feel like A.J. Terrell is capable of really shutting down a guy like Justin Jefferson, funnily enough. He's faced a lot of different receivers this season, run the gamut of receivers. Mike Evans, he's faced DK Metcalf, I believe he's faced. Let me think. Who else has he faced? He's faced Chris Olave, I believe. He's faced a lot of talented receivers. And he's been around the block and been one of the premier cornerbacks for the past 5 years. And in this matchup, it's weird because I actually don't think Justin Jefferson is going to have the quote-unquote advantage in this one. But I do think that Justin Jefferson's presence going up against A.J. Terrell is really going to be a nightmare for the rest of the Falcons defense because Justin Jefferson is going to occupy a lot of space for the Vikings on offense. Whether or not he gets the ball is really up to Sam Darnold and the game flow, right? Because the Vikings are a very versatile team at their core. They don't necessarily need to have Justin Jefferson going that early in football games. So look for him to be more present rather than ultimately be more winning in terms of his matchup, but it's still an interesting one to dissect because Justin Jefferson has the ability to go off, but in certain situations he knows when to rein it in and allow certain other players to make noise for this Vikings offense, and he's done it in recent weeks as well. So this one could be a weird one to analyze. Maybe you might want to sit Justin Jefferson this week, surprisingly, but it's just one that sits in my mind as more of a tactical one rather than trying to really one-up each other, because that's kind of what has been the story of Justin Jefferson this season. And then the third matchup, another one we see very often in the National Football League over there in the AFC is Tyreek Hill against Sauce Gardner. Now this one kind of has lost its luster. Both of these teams not where they want to be, obviously, but it's still a fun match because these two are going to be facing each other for years to come in the AFC East. I mean, both of these guys, really speedy guys, really physical in nature at the position, more so Sauce, but Tyreek Hill has added that to his game. In this matchup, we finally get to see, the true test of why Sauce Gardner might be falling off a little bit and why this Jets defense as a whole has lacked the kind of grittiness of last year's secondary. So that's why I feel like this matchup may not be as fun as past iterations of it, but it's still an important one from a fantasy perspective because, let's be honest, Tyreek Hill can get going for you at any different time. But this one is also going to come down to tactics as well, and more so pride, because I feel like, for what it's worth, Sauce Gardner has been a lot more reserved this season. He's been a lot less loud, a lot less braggadocious, and that's what I like about Sauce. He backs his swagger up a little bit, but he hasn't necessarily been doing that. He hasn't necessarily been on the field that much, it feels like to me, in critical moments. And so that's why I feel like overall this Jets defense seems to be lacking a leader in that secondary. Potentially, the Dolphins are going to want to exploit that, and they feel like they're going to have the advantage. They're going to have the overwhelming amount of matchup they want to exploit in this one as well. So this one could be very weird for this Jets secondary, but if Sauce Gardner plays the level we know he's capable of, then this matchup really comes down to, well, is Tyreek Hill going to be Tyreek Hill? Because, like I said, this Dolphins offense is too diverse to really know week in, week out if Tyreek Hill is going to be of that much importance to it. Because we see Jonnu Smith now stepping up. We're seeing the rejuvenation of Devon Achane over these past couple of weeks. And so we really don't necessarily know the true standing of what Tyreek Hill can mean to this offense down the stretch. And even if they want to make a little run at the postseason, because they're 5-7 right now, and chances are they might have to win out to really make a push at an AFC wildcard spot. So that's why I feel like this one could be an interesting one. Just because, much like the Justin Jefferson and AJ Terrell one, this one kind of stems down to the importance of both of these players in this game and which one is more effective in terms of this matchup as well. And the last one, another one we see very often as well, this one with a lot of meaning in it, Amon-Ra St. Brown going up against Jair Alexander. And this is going to be a fun one because Amon-Ra is unlike any wide receiver one in the National Football League because he combines so many different traits so well, but he's not someone who, is a quote-unquote superstar kind of mentality player, if you know what I mean. He's not someone who, he's understated is what I'm trying to say in terms of his superstardom, because he is a superstar, but the way he does it is completely unique to what the Detroit Lions do and to what the receivers are able to do, because Amon-Ra is one of those guys who may not have the largest presence throughout the game, but he's always someone who can find a rhythm at any given time, and you can't stop him. Once Amon-Ra gets in rhythm, once him and Goff develop that rapport throughout the game, chances are you're not going to be able to stop him. And he does it with succinct route running, he does it with precision, he does it with instant decision making at the line, and he understands corners' tendencies better than most receivers in this National Football League. Going up against Jair Alexander, a very aggressive, physical cover man, Amon-Ra is going to want to get in his head in terms of his route running abilities. Because if the Lions feel like they're going to win this game passing the football, then by all means, Amon-Ra becomes much more important than, say, if they're going to want to grind the Packers out with a run game. And so, if you're Jair Alexander, you're not going to want to get caught up in how Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to utilize his talent. Because in the end of the day, Amon-Ra is so frustrating to defend because he's one of the best route runners, if not the best route runner in the National Football League. And so, in certain moments when the Packers are seemingly gaining momentum, maybe it's a 3rd and long situation, and they want to get off the field, and they want to get the ball back to their offense, that's where you can't let your head drop if you're Jair Alexander. He's been excellent at it all year, him and McKinney. But look for Jair Alexander to really be tested in this one in terms of trying to be too aggressive and allowing Amon-Ra to develop that rhythm that he so covets between him and Jared Goff, because that's poison to any team. You can't let Amon-Ra St. Brown get going against you, because that really eliminates a lot of what you can bring in terms of physicality on the defensive side of the football. And that's the trap, like I said, that the Packers will want to avoid, and Jair Alexander especially will want to avoid in this matchup. Let me know what you think about this one in the comments, because that will just about do it for today's edition of the show. I've been Christopher Shepard. This has been the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Like, follow, and subscribe to the show in the network if you feel so inclined. Make yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube as well. Great way to contribute and interact with the show. Other than that, see you tomorrow at 3:30 p.m. Eastern for another great edition of the show. I am out.